With the changes to system sniping and with the recent changes to the ability to deconstruct facilities in architected systems, in addition to the prior changes that have already been made to the way that economies work overall, it's fair to say that colonization in Elite Dangerous is finally in a good place. And with colonization in a good place, a lot of commanders are asking themselves, should I enter the fray? And if so, how should I think about colonizing my different systems? One of the things that I've been asked consistently about is some kind of tutorial, which, even though the Elite Colonization Mega Guide does exist, it is right now approaching 100 pages of detailed content, so it can be somewhat intimidating and not for everyone. But if you're interested in like all the details, like it's increasingly going to be found all within this document, which is really not just my document, but it's rather a collaboration of many commanders across different communities that have come together and written different pieces of it, contributed data, tested things, quality control stuff. So it's really a community labor of love with regards to how colonization works in Elite Dangerous. But today we're going to be focusing on something a bit more specific and practical, which is how to build a refinery in a given system and how to think about building a refinery. Why a refinery? Building a refinery is generally the first system people build when they start building up a local area, because the overwhelming materials requirement for building stations is and comes in the forms of metals such as aluminum, titanium, and steel, and CMM and composites, which are also a refinery material. Because of that reason, people tend to start building out refineries first, providing a local source of metals before they then proceed to use those metals to construct things around that particular system in that particular area. While this is not generally a big issue right around the bubble, when you're maybe 2,000 light years away from the bubble, it starts becoming a much bigger issue, because like going back to the bubble for loading up on steel, for example, would take 4 carrier jumps, and that takes forever. As a result, having a local refinery is usually an important step to building up any given cluster of systems. And that's why people in particular have been focusing on refineries as the economy of initial choice, if you want. What does building a refinery entail, first and foremost? First and foremost, it's important to notice that when you're building a refinery, you generally want to build both a ground port and a space port. That's because the two different ports create different set of production commodities. Ground ports include in their production list CMM composites and ceramic composites, which are only available at ground ports, whereas spaceports produce space-only commodities like insulating membranes. And all of the 3 ones I mentioned are necessary in pretty significant amounts when it comes to colonization efforts. So when you build refineries, you almost always think about building refineries in pairs of a spaceport and a ground port for that reason. So where and how do you build refineries? Well, first and foremost, like let's get a few things out of the way of where you cannot build refineries. And specifically, there's a number of situations where you simply cannot build refineries. In particular, in slots in the orbit of stars, like this one, in slots in the orbit of gas giants, like this one, in slots in the orbit of non-rocky planets, which have no planetary slots, like this icy body with no planetary slots, or this high metal content in planetary slots. You also cannot build refineries around water worlds, and furthermore, you cannot tuck refinery ports under Earth-like world or water world tier 2 and tier 3 ports. That's actually a bit of an advanced strategy that caters to certain economy types. Once we get to doing a tutorial about industrial ports or scientific high-tech ports, we'll explain in more detail what exactly that means. Suffice it to say right now that if you have the ability to use specialized ports like the ones I mentioned, it is possible to tuck one of those ports underneath a tier 3 port built in at a water world or at an Earth-like world and benefit from the massive population boost that these particular types of planets, in particular water worlds and Earth-like worlds, provide, which in turn translates also into an absolutely massive production boost of the commodities that are produced at those stations. Population boost, however, is on a local body basis, so having a tier 3 port, like for example here at this primary port location in the orbit of this water world, doesn't really do you any good if you're building a refinery down here in one of these local bodies that are sort of not the same local body as this planetary port. This may sound all complicated. Again, forget about it in the context of refinery. We're going to get to this when we talk about scientific high-tech economies and when we talk about industrial economies at some future date. Let's get back to where you can and when you cannot build refineries. Obviously, you also cannot build refineries in asteroid belts because you can only literally build asteroid stations right now in these. And any kind of, again, star of any kind, primary main sequence star or not, these are all situations where you cannot build refineries directly. You can influence those economies through weak links and get a refinery economy through weak links, but that again is a kind of very advanced strategy. You'd need to build probably in the range of like 10 different industry hubs. So if you really wanted to make this system into a refinery, like you could make a primary port here of colony type, for example, which would become military based on the star inherent economy, and then build like something in the range of 10 different industry hubs at each of these different slots. And that would give a 50% industry value, which would probably be enough to produce some kind of like industry materials at the start. But again, it's something that's kind of beyond the point of this guide and generally advanced and undesirable. Well, not necessarily undesirable, but like really kind of beyond the point of this guide. Complicated. Let's get to the sort of less complicated thing, so we talked about the gas giants and modern works and like where you cannot build. In increasing order of preference, where can you build refineries and how would you go about it? Well, the first option and the most abundant option is icy bodies. Icy bodies are possibly the most abundant type of planet in the galaxy. They are kind of pretty much everywhere, and chances are you should quite relatively easily find one and be able to kind of like build around one of these. Some of these have more slots, some of these have fewer slots, but pretty much like their ubiquity is what kind of makes them overall interesting. Now, contrary to popular belief, it is absolutely possible to build a refinery on an icy body if you want to do so. You just need to be a little sophisticated as to how you go about it. And I'm going to bring up a tool called Raven Colonial, which is absolutely amazing, and the link is going to be provided in the in a pinned comment below. So have a look at that, which kind of allows people to plan their systems really in sort of a number of ways that caters to like whatever they want to do with them, and it's really sophisticated and really well done. So here is a representation of the different icy bodies that we were talking about. Like the one thing that it doesn't import is like how many slots are available. For the sake of argument, let's pretend that on this icy body, which has no biological and no geologicals, but only has a tidally lock factor, in addition to being landable, has 3 and 3 slots, because again, we're explaining a few things at this point in time. A planet which does not have geologicals, biologicals, or rings is what I generally call a vanilla planet. It's vanilla because it has the inherent economy of a planet only, and it is not affected by so-called overrides, which add or change the inherent economies of the planet itself. Now, an icy body has an inherent economy of type industrial. So if we, let's say for the sake of argument, build a Coriolis starport around it, as we can see from the yellow color here, this Coriolis would inherit the industrial value of a planet, and it would be a pure industrial facility up here of 140% industry. How do we build a refinery in a situation like this? Well, there's a few ways to go about it. We cannot build a pure refinery no matter what we do, because if we build a colony type port, it will pick up industry from the planet. If we build a specialized port, the specialized port will have some kind of intrinsic economy, and there is no such thing as a specialized refinery port, which means that we need to build something else and combine it with a number of facilities in order to turn it into a refinery. Now, the good news is that, based again on the recent changes to colonization, you can have two economies coexist without cannibalizing the production of each other. The top two economies of each market do not interfere and can happily coexist no matter what those two economies are. So whenever you're designing systems, you can happily design a system that has up to two economies without messing anything up. And this is what you use to your advantage to actually build a refinery on an icy body, because you're going to have some kind of economy. So let's get rid of this correlate. Let's build a primary port here for the sake of argument, something kind of harmless, like for example an industrial output. And then let's go back to our icy planet and let's build a planetary facility. And the first thing you want to build, probably on any kind of body that like you're planning to turn into a refinery, is a planetary port of some kind. Like typically typically a civilian surface outpost on certain planets, or a specialized, and by specialized I mean either industrial or scientific surface outpost. Now, in this case, because we don't have modifiers, and this is a so-called vanilla planet, it doesn't matter that much if we pick a civilian or an industrial one to start. We're gonna get industry as a standard and the starting economy no matter what choice we make in that regard. I can show you, like, a civilian port starts as fully industrial at 140%. If we were to pick industrial, it would be the same, but it would be at a lower industrial value of only 90%. So again, depending on what we want to do eventually with this, that's something to take into account. You can start with a lower or higher industrial value based on the port that you select. If we wanted to do a refinery on a port that's vanilla like this, we could even go scientific if we wanted. Like, we could put a scientific port, and this would have only one economy, which is 50% high tech, and this would not be influenced by the local body as it is a specialized port. But let's go the more standard route, and let's actually start with a civilian surface outpost. That gives us 50% economy, 140% industry economy. We now have two more ground slots that we can play with, so let's go ahead and build an a refinery hub, which is the primary tool to specialize economies towards refinery. So we built a refinery hub, which we can build, by the way, because a civilian surface outpost gives us a construction point of tier 2, which is what is needed to build a refinery hub. This refinery hub needs a tier 1 construction point and gives us a tier 2 construction point. So here we go. We have already a planet which has 140% industrial and 120% refinery. So it's a pretty balanced refinery industrial economy. If for whatever reason you wanted to skew it more towards refinery, as I mentioned earlier, you could actually make this into an industrial one. And here you would find that you are actually in a situation where refinery is the primary economy for a planet, not industrial anymore. Now, this matters more in spaceports because the primary port determines the looks of the interiors of your spaceport. So for spaceports, you might want to decide that you prefer the looks of one particular economy over another because you prefer the interiors look of a station over another. But for planetary ports, there's no such thing as interiors for a port. So it is purely a sort of like cosmetic thing in practice. It doesn't really affect anything. If you had two economies and you got to choose, you generally would want to go with a higher value, so in this case civilian, just because it would have higher production. That's it. Like there's no benefit in this case. If all we're doing is this simple exercise here, there is no benefit in having a lower industrial value. So again, we built our first refinery and we have a surface outpost hub. This is already enough to become a pretty efficient refinery as far as ground facilities are concerned. At some point or another, though, we might want to actually introduce a spaceport to export those facilities. And we can build a tier 1 spaceport from the get-go if we wanted to. We could build very quickly an orbital spaceport. But if we do that, we cannot build an industrial spaceport here because the strong link connects to the local spaceport down here. And as a result, an industrial output would be only industrial. It would not pick up the economy from the surface outpost, because the surface outpost doesn't do that. Oh, almost this is like actually an interesting one. If we do a Coriolis though, or if we do like a commercial outpost, then this changes, and this is something that instead is picked up by the port. So here we see that the proportion is different because effectively we have the 120% of the refinery down below, we have the 140 of the civilian surface outpost, but the commercial outpost actually picks up the underlying economy of the planet as well. Whether this is a bug or not is something that was never clarified. It's something to keep in mind, that the inherent economy will be contributing also directly to any colony type port in orbit. So this is going to have a higher proportion of industry no matter what you do than the one on the ground. But nevertheless, we have 120% refinery, which can coexist with an industry economy, and that is going to give you pretty decent amount of space materials. Now, this is a commercial outpost, however, so you're limited only to a medium pad. What if you wanted instead to have a large pad? Well, in that case, you need to build a core release station or a beta station. And to do that, you would need to build first something that's hopefully somewhat harmless. So maybe we can build, let's say for the sake of argument out here, a couple of satellites, which could some pretty decent stats, or maybe a satellite and a communication station, which actually complements that pretty well. So we build these two. We have 1 point, delete this one, I don't know why it's there. We have 1 point from the initial primary port that was created. This gives us 3 points, and this we can delete. And we have 3 ports available and 3 tier 2 construction points available, and that should be more than enough to go ahead and build our Coriolis station. And this is the smallest space station, which actually has large pads and as a result can supply sort of large scale refinery materials in a given area. So this is the simplest refinery system that you can build anywhere, really. You have a vanilla, even just icy planet. It is not the best refinery, but it works. And in many cases, it's good enough to produce a pretty significant amount of goods, especially if you go ahead and build this system further to higher levels. The way you would improve it further is you probably sort of build another satellite at some point or something simple that also generates tier 2 construction point like this one. Note that I'm picking facilities that don't have an economy, so they don't throw weak links that get in the way. And then if I have a third slot down here, I would use that to build a second refinery hub, and that would boost the refinery value very significantly as it doubles it. It's now 240. These becomes primary refinery also in space, and a 240% refinery in space with a coupled tier 1 port refinery on the ground is a pretty powerful asset to build pretty much anything that you need. So this is the simplest, the most basic way to build a refiner just about anywhere. We've looked, however, at a vanilla economy with an Icy Body. What if we're not talking vanilla anymore? And what if we start introducing modifiers, or as they're called in the game, overrides? Overrides are geological, biological, and rings, which introduce different types of elements into the overall mix. And those can make things somewhat complicated. So let me relocate our primary port somewhere else so that we have it out of the way for our little exercise, because the planet we wanted to play with is this one that actually has geological signals. Again, let's assume for a moment that we have free space and free planetary slots available for construction, just like we had in the example below. If we have geologicals, things change somewhat. If we have geologicals, if we build a planetary port of civilian type, as we were doing earlier, now we don't just have industrial economy, we have industrial and extraction. You see the geosignal, which normally would give both industry and extraction, on an Icy Body which already has extraction, which already has industry, essentially does nothing on the industry side, but it does introduce extraction. So now we have an economy that has two different factors, and makes things somewhat more complicated, because now we have two economies. One way to work around that is to, instead of building a civilian surface outpost, to build an industrial specialized outpost. That gets around the problem of geologicals introducing the additional economy, because this guarantees industry only. And if we do this, yes, it's true that we're going to have a lower industrial value, but we're not going to have the problem to have to deal with the economy of extraction that is otherwise introduced. And if we do that, then we can go ahead and build our nice little refinery hubs down here. And basically we go about it just exactly the same way as we're going in the example below with an industrial surface outpost, with the only difference that now if we build a Coriolis up here, that one will pick up the extraction economy. So in this case, we have refinery, which is 120%, which is not enough to be in the top two economies. We need some additional help from a third refinery hub, like putting one here. And if we do this, we end up with refinery, industrial, and extraction on the ground, and with sorry, I made a mistake here. This is a civilian. I delete this one and instead wanted a Coriolis up here. I was changing the wrong one. Orbital. There you go. Coriolis. Boom. And again, we end up with a refinery first, industrial second, so these two economies coexist and don't cannibalize itself, and extraction third. If you want a refinery in this setup with three economies, so refinery, industrial, and extraction needs to be last. Extraction needs to be the third economy if you're going to have all three. The reason it needs to be third is because refinery and extraction coexist just fine. Extraction does not consume any of the metals that refineries produce. In fact, it contributes its own metals in the form of gold and copper and a handful of others that are sort of additive to the refinery economy. Extraction does cannibalize the industrial component of this market somewhat, so it is not ideal. But if you're going for a refinery, you don't really care that some of your industry is cannibalized by the extraction economy. And if you're trying to kind of squeeze a refinery onto an Icy Body, again, you're probably wiggling with a very particular system and kind of trying to get away with things that are a bit out of the ordinary. So this is how you make a refinery in a situation where you have to deal with extraction as a economy type. You start with a specialized port on the ground, and then you make sure that you have enough refinery to push refinery in the top two economies and extraction into a third for your space station. Note what happens if instead of a specialized industrial port, I had picked a civilian one. That is no longer true. A civilian one picks up extraction and then pass it up to a space station, and here we have extraction as the first economy, which means that the concept of this refinery breaks and it no longer works as a refinery, because we now have this industrial as a third economy, which is going to gobble up a massive amount of the metals produced by the refinery, and it kind of whole breaks the concept. So if you're building on icy bodies, but you're going to see in a moment this is true also of high metal content worlds, you want to start with a specialized port. And by the way, you could probably also put a scientific one if you wanted here. No, because you pick up industrial from geosignals, so you can't do, like, you have to do an industrial one. You can't do a scientific one for this to work. So that's a version with geosignals. Biosignals are even worse on an icy body, especially if you combine them with geosignals. I honestly wouldn't even bother trying to build a refinery with an icy body that has both geologicals or ring and biosignals, because that adds agriculture, terraforming, extraction, in addition to industry, which is inherent, and then you're also trying to put refinery on top. It's a total dog's breakfast of a local body. Forget about it. That planet is better used for other stuff than for a refinery at that point. So we talked about icy bodies. Now, what's next? What's the next option up in terms of like what's good to what you can build a refinery around? The next thing up would be high metal content worlds. High metal content worlds are nearly as common as icy bodies, and they tend to have a lot of ground slots, which makes them actually pretty good for an economy type like refinery, which relies predominantly on ground slots to specialize its industry, because as we were talking about earlier, you can't actually specialize a refinery in space because there is no building to do that. So if we look at a high metal content world, again, these are a couple of examples of high metal content worlds that have 3 slots each. So they're not humongous, but they're going to work for the sake of our little exercise. So I'm going to go back to Raven Colonial, pick a new system, which unfortunately this one looks like it's not in the... no, it is. I just did it wrong. So hopefully I did it right this time. And pulling it up as we speak. There we go. So this is, again, did I pick the right one? This looks suspiciously... No, this is right. These are high metal content worlds. Okay. These are all high metal content worlds that don't have modifiers. So they're kind of a more plain vanilla version. But the same consideration that I was making earlier with icy bodies apply to high metal content worlds as well. Here, it's pretty much the same thing, except instead of working with intrinsic economy of type industrial, you're working with an intrinsic economy of type extraction. But the same concepts and the same things that I was discussing with icy bodies apply to the logic here as well. So again, if you start on the surface with a civilian surface port, it's going to be purely extraction. And then if you go ahead and build a refinery hub, it's going to give you extraction and refinery, which not only are compatible because of the first two, but they're also pretty intrinsically compatible. So then you go ahead and let's assume that we build a number of satellites so that we got the construction points, which I'm going to skip for the sake of time. We can go ahead and build our Coriolis, and our Coriolis is going to be mostly extraction, but with a solid 120% refinery. And this, again, just works. The good thing about high metal content worlds is that they have a lot of slots. So you can go and build satellites all around your system, or communication stations all around your system, and then you can go and maybe plot down another 4 hubs if you have 5 slots on the planet, and that's going to give you a pretty freaking strong refinery economy overall, as you'll see here. 1, 2, 3. Let's assume again this one has 5 slots for the sake of argument, and refinery hub. And look, again, this gives you a 480% refinery on the ground, which translates to 480 in space as well, with extraction as well. If you wanted to get really cute, by the way, and you plan to do things that are sort of like a bit more creative, you could also try and place industrial surface outpost instead of a colony 1 port, which would give you some industrial, but that gets into the same problem we were discussing earlier with the Icy Body, that the order of these economies is wrong for refinery to be compatible with extraction. This amount of industrial is going to cannibalize your refinery still in a pretty meaningful way. How do you fix this? The way you fix this is you convert one of your refinery hubs to an industrial one, and boom, see what happens? As counterintuitive as this is a neat trick to get industrial up to slot number 2, and as a result be compatible again with a refinery even in space, with extraction now as a 3rd economy. So this way we managed to build an industrial and an industrial port and refinery port around a high metal content world, which is inherently instead of extraction type. We can do the same. I believe we can play with it, see if we can manage, but I believe we can on this one, unlike on the Icy one where we couldn't. We can try and get it to instead have refinery, high-tech, and extraction as the last. Again, we want extraction as the last, however, and here we're gonna need to convert one more hub from refinery to scientific, but it's possible. So here we've gotten a refinery and high-tech system that has extraction as a 3rd economy. Extraction is going to cannibalize some of the high-tech production, but typically not a huge amount, so it works. So this is another way to go about it with high metal content worlds. The same criteria, and like again, I'll make this document available if you want to read it as part of a mega guide in the next couple of days. But the same criteria generally apply when it comes to modifiers. Geologicals is manageable. It adds industry and extraction to a high metal content world. Well, it doesn't really add extraction because it already has extraction. It only adds industry, so you can work with industry the same way we worked on an Icy Body. Biologicals is bad for refinery because it adds agri and terraforming to an extraction economy, which again gets into at least 4 type of economies. You'd have to go a specialized port if you were to go in that direction. And geo and bio is the worst of all worlds because again, you get a dog's breakfast of a planet, which is really, really hard to work with in terms of getting the economies in the order that you want. It's possible to work with anything, but again, it's really not recommended. So that's a high metal content world. So where do we go next? And here we start getting into from workable to good, or even great. Rocky worlds, rocky bodies. Rocky worlds, rocky bodies, even as vanilla without modifiers, start out great because they are the ones that have refinery as the intrinsic value of the body itself. And so they are the natural place where you, if you can, find them and with a decent number of slots, where you would want to be building refineries to begin with. The issue is they're not as common as Icy Bodies and as high metal content worlds, and they generally have limited construction slots, which limits again how high you can get the refinery value of some of those markets, considering that, again, you can only put so many industry hub in the slots that you have available. But they do make for the overall best pure refineries if you start with vanilla planets, or they also make some pretty good refinery industry extraction combo systems, like the ones where we're talking about if they have geological or rings, so long as they have no organics. They also work as pretty decent refinery and agricultural setups, even if bios are present. Like Rocky and Icy, you don't really want both geo and bio present. I mean, that's a general rule. It's like geo and bio tend to mess the planet up when they're both present at the same time. So let us find a rocky body, which I think I had available somewhere around here, with some ability to construct something. Let's see, these are all high metal content worlds. I think I actually had one right here in this system that I actually colonized. And this is, I believe, a rocky body. Yes, this is a rocky world. And let's pull it up in Raven Colonial and then go from there. This is a little complicated because I have a bunch of stuff here which I'm probably just going to delete to make things simple for us to go over, as these introduce weak links and do complicated things that we don't worry about right now. Okay, cool. So, relatively simple system. We have a primary port. Don't worry about what the primary port is. Doesn't matter for the sake of argument here. And we have a rocky body. This time, our rocky body has biological signals. So it's the first sort of planet where we work with biosignals overall. And biological signals introduce not just agriculture economy, but both agriculture and terraforming economy. Terraforming economy is a terrible economy, which is a consumption-based only economy. But again, if you have biological, there's no way to not have terraforming if you use colony-type ports. What you could do here, which I couldn't because I went large planetary port, but let's downscale to a civilian port, is you could play with some of the tricks that we were playing around earlier. Like, if you wanted to go agriculture and terraforming and keep it simple, you would go with a civilian surface outpost. Or if you wanted to get a little more fancy, you could go with an industrial port. But the problem with that is you'd still have agriculture and terraforming picked up by the starport. So if you do that, and if you wanted for your industry to not be completely crippled by everything else up here, you would need to convert some of these refinery hubs to industrial hubs until you get them to roughly this point, where refinery again is first and industrial is second. At this point, you get refinery, industrial first and second, agriculture that is going to be massively cannibalized by everything else and is going to eat up some of your industry production, but really not much of your metal production, so your overall refinery is safe, and terraforming as the final economy, which with its lower value has limited impact on a 380% refinery as a whole. So this is an example of how you can build up a pretty meaningful refinery in rocky body, which has organics. Or again, you could say, I don't care about having industry up there, so forget industry. I'm just going to have refinery and agriculture. And if you do that, you can build something that looks like this, and here you're going to have a pretty decent agricultural production in addition to your refinery, even though again some of that is consumed by your terraforming economy. If you wanted to fix that, you could, by the way. If you had another slot in orbit, you could build a space farm to create a strong link, or if you don't, you can build on the ground an agricultural settlement, like a large one, and this gives a much more significant proportion of agriculture, which protects it to just by sheer volume from the consumption of terraforming in a more meaningful way. And this is probably a more useful combined refinery agriculture market than just the one that was shown before with sort of a more focused value. But again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what you care about. Like, there's no right or wrong answer in terms of like how you design these systems. Anyhow, this is a rocky body, and this is probably the second best planet type for building refineries overall. And it's particularly great if it doesn't have biologics, and it's still very workable if it has geologicals with it overall. Now, last but certainly not least, the very best, in my opinion, planet for a refinery, and not just a refinery, is a rocky ice world. What's the main issue with rocky ice world? The main issue is that there's not a lot of them. They're pretty rare. And when you do find them, they tend to not have a lot of construction slots to work with. However, they start with both refinery and industry, which means that you can, at the same time, like with, get two of the most useful economies for colonization purposes just by using colony type ports without going out of your way and messing with sort of all the tips and tricks that we are talking about here. And let's pull back and actually get to a rocky ice planet. I think this was it. Yes, rocky ice world. So this is system name. Let's pull it up in Raven Colonial. See if I can manage it. There it is. And it's back. And it's not the right system. Let's try again. Second try. This is not it, I think. Let's try. Sending me the wrong one, which means it failed to copy the right. Oh, because I am in the wrong system. Never mind. Give me 1 sec. I'll actually pull us into the right system, which was down here. Where we are, and this is, I think, where the rocky ice body was. And no, where did it go? Oh, here it is. Found. Finally found it. Sorry for the delay. And system, pull in the right one this time. And here is our, I was gonna say rocky ice body, but this is one of the examples when Revel Colonial actually doesn't have the correct data from Spanish. So it's not pulling in the correct data for the planet. I was trying to see if there is another rocky ice body that I could show you. Otherwise, I could jump into the system and actually push an update to Spanish and see if Raven Colonial pulls it in. I guess that could be the other way to do it. Let's see if we can actually work it that way, because that might be faster than trying to find the system with a rocky ice body out of the blue. And let's see, ED market connector, portion update. And this one is now updated. Let's see if it pulls it in. No, it doesn't pull it in. Let's see if I have a quick system of my list that has a rocky ice planet that I can show you. Otherwise, I think you are starting to get the gist of how it all works, even without going through. But it is kind of the best system, so I wanted to show you like just how good it can be for the purpose of colonization. These are ice worlds. As I said, they are rare, so the thing about it is finding them is the tricky part. Let's see if Arietis sector has one. I think this might have had one. This is Icy. All icy worlds. Alright, it doesn't seem like Rocky Icy Body are forthcoming in my little list, so we're gonna do it in a different way. We're gonna do it the old school way, which is we're gonna go to Inara and we're gonna pull up Rocky Ice World with the body searcher in Inara, since we are failing at doing it right here. Copy the system name, set as current location, data, search nearest bodies, planet type, Rocky Ice World. Let's see if we can punch this into our Raven Colonial and find it. We made it. All right, sorry for the delay, but we finally got it. Here is our Rocky Ice World. And there's a few actually that are, again, vanilla. They have volcanism, but volcanism should not mess with inherent economy, so we'll get to that in a moment. So again, here, if we start with civilian surface outpost, this one already comes, again, with refinery and industrial, by the way, in equal amounts. And then if we wanted to, we could actually, I kind of wonder if you could actually stack it and see if this one ends up with 220 and 220, and you build a third one, and this one ends up with 300 and 300. So like just by stacking civilian outpost, you can get some pretty massive boosts. And then you build a Coriolis in orbit of this, and as simple as that, boom, you have a 380% and 380% economy, perfectly balanced, like all things should be, industrial and refinery planet with basically no effort except the effort to actually build these stations. So for this reason, I think Rocky Ice Worlds are the best. Even if you had geologicals, that would add extraction, but you should be able to work with extraction in a similar way to like how we were showing earlier. And these make for the freaking best refinery industrial combo powerhouses in the galaxy. Again, the problem is finding them and finding one that has a decent amount of planetary construction slots to be able to place a number of civilian outposts down here. Note that actually chaining civilian outposts can be sort of into, you can alternatively build hubs if you wanted to build hubs. I mean, there are some cases where you kind of wanted to do one or the other, but like if you do that, you end up with a lower industrial amount than if you just chained civilian ports. Not to mention that these actually cost construction points to build versus civilian surface outposts give you construction points to build. So again, if you have the ability to chain civilian construction outposts, this gives incredibly powerful combination of industrial and refinery on Rocky Ice Worlds. That's it. It was a lot to take in, but it hopefully gives you a sense of how to think about building refineries. Play with Raven Colonial if you're in doubt. Like, you can experiment here at very little cost other than that of your time. These are simple refineries, so like there's no kind of super fancy multi-economy or crazy things involved in building. If you want all the details, they're in the Colonization Mega Guide, so consider looking at the Colonization Mega Guide, which is now in version 2.1 and increasingly is working towards 2.2, where we're adding even more information about the ideal economy type, coming for instance from this video, and dual economy compatibility. In here already there's a whole list of information that talks about which economies are and are not compatible in the appendix in great detail, and in the main document as a sort of color-coded table to sort of help appreciate what you can mix and match and how to think about it. So that's it. Commanders, glory to mankind. Commander Mechan, over and out.